The showdown on Maple Street didn't end with Patricia's hasty retreat. Instead, it sparked something bigger, something none of us had anticipated. As the crowd dispersed, a few neighbors lingered, their curiosity turning into cautious conversation. One of them was Sarah, a young mother who lived 2 doors down. She approached Claire hesitantly, clutching a reusable grocery bag in her hands like it might shield her from conflict. Hi, Sarah began, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting Patricia to reappear at any moment. I wanted to say thank you. What you did today, that took guts. Claire smiled warmly, leaning back slightly in her wheelchair. It wasn't just me, she said, gesturing toward Officer Reynolds and Duke. We're stronger when we stand together. Sarah nodded, though her expression remained uneasy. Still, it means a lot. I've been fined so many times for stupid things, leaving my trash cans out too long, having a garden gnome that's not regulation size. It's exhausting. Her voice cracked slightly, and she looked down at her feet. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells every single day. Her words resonated with others nearby. A man named Tom, who always waved hello but never stopped to chat, spoke up next. They fined me last month because my mailbox was dented after a baseball hit it. A kid's baseball, for crying out loud. And they wouldn't let me fix it myself. They insisted I buy a new one from their approved vendor list. The murmurs grew louder as more people shared their stories. Each complaint painted a clearer picture of how controlling and suffocating the HOA had become under Patricia's leadership. For years, everyone had quietly endured the rules, too afraid to speak out or unsure if anyone else felt the same way. But now, standing here on Maple Street with Claire and Duke as unlikely symbols of resistance, people realized they weren't alone. Officer Reynolds, who'd been listening silently, cleared his throat. If enough of you are serious about making a change, he said, addressing the group, there are steps you can take. File formal complaints against the HOA. Start a petition demanding reform. Even consider running for positions on the board yourselves. He paused, glancing at Claire. You've already shown them they can't push you around. Now it's time to show them what kind of neighborhood you want. That night, Claire hosted an impromptu meeting in our living room. Neighbors squeezed onto couches and folding chairs, while others sat cross-legged on the floor. Max wagged his tail happily, thrilled by the unexpected attention. The mood was a mix of excitement and nervous energy, like we were planning a rebellion, and, in a way, we were. Sarah brought snacks, Tom offered to design flyers, and another neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, volunteered to draft a letter to the HOA outlining everyone's grievances. By the end of the evening, we had a plan. We'd gather signatures for a petition calling for changes to the HOA's policies, including caps on fines, transparency in decision-making, and protections for residents with disabilities. If the board refused to listen, we'd escalate, starting with contacting local news outlets to shine a spotlight on the issue. As the meeting wrapped up, Claire turned to me, her eyes bright with determination. This is just the beginning, she said softly. Patricia thought she could scare us into silence, but instead, she woke us up. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride and maybe a little fear. Taking on the HOA wouldn't be easy, and Patricia wouldn't go down without a fight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could turn this neighborhood into something better, not just for us, but for everyone. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, I noticed something different. Neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles instead of polite nods. Kids played basketball in the cul-de-sac, their laughter echoing through the air. And parked proudly in front of our house was Claire's van, a small but powerful symbol of defiance. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: Ridgewood Heights would never be the same again. When Claire and I first found the house on Maple Street, it felt like we finally caught a break. Life hadn't been easy for us up until that point. We'd spent years hopping from one rental to another, never really settling down. Every place we lived in had something wrong with it. Leaky roofs, noisy neighbors, or landlords who didn't care about repairs. But this little house, it was different. Sure, it needed some work. The paint was peeling, the kitchen cabinets were outdated, and there was a weird stain on the living room ceiling that neither of us wanted to investigate too closely. But despite all that, it had charm. There was something warm about the creaky wooden floors and the way sunlight poured through the windows in the afternoon. And the backyard, big enough for Max, our golden retriever, to run around in, felt like a dream come true. What sealed the deal for us was the neighborhood. Maple Street seemed peaceful, the kind of place where kids played outside and people waved at each other from their porches. It wasn't fancy, but it was welcoming. Or so we thought. What we didn't realize at the time was that this street fell under the control of the Ridgewood Heights Homeowners Association, HOA. At first, we didn't think much of it. We'd heard of HOAs before. They're supposed to keep neighborhoods looking nice, right? Rules about keeping lawns trimmed and houses painted sounded reasonable enough. How bad could it be? Then Patricia Langley showed up at our door. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Her smile was polite, but there was something sharp in her eyes, like she was sizing us up. "Welcome to Ridgewood Heights," she said, handing over a thick packet of papers. "These are the community guidelines. Please read them carefully." We flipped through the pages later that evening. There were rules about everything. What color your mailbox could be, how high your grass could grow, even what kind of curtains you could hang in your windows. Some of it seemed ridiculous, but Claire shrugged it off. "It's just paperwork," she said. "We'll figure it out." But figuring it out turned out to be harder than we expected. A few days after Patricia's visit, we got a letter reminding us that we hadn't paid the $300 annual HOA fee yet. $300 might not sound like much to some people, but for us, it was a stretch. We were still paying off medical bills from Claire's treatments. She has multiple sclerosis, which makes everyday life challenging enough without adding financial stress. So we decided to hold off on joining the HOA for now. Surely, they wouldn't kick up a fuss over a couple who just needed a little time to get settled, right? Wrong. Things escalated quickly. One morning, I left for work early, leaving Claire to handle errands since she was feeling well enough to drive her van. Her mobility isn't great most days. She uses a wheelchair when her legs give out, but she manages. When I came home that evening, though, Claire was sitting on the porch, fuming. Her van was gone. In its place was a note taped to the mailbox. "Unregistered vehicles are prohibited within Ridgewood Heights. Please contact the HOA office to retrieve your property." I couldn't believe it. They'd towed her van because we hadn't paid the fee. Not only that, but according to the towing company, Claire had argued with them when they came to take it away. She refused to move her wheelchair out of their way, calling them bullies and threatening to call the police. Knowing my wife, I knew exactly how the conversation must have gone. Claire doesn't back down easily, especially when she feels like someone is picking on her or on us. That night, as we sat together trying to process what had happened, Claire looked at me with fire in her eyes. "They can't treat us like this," she said firmly. "If they want to fight, they've got one." Little did I know then just how far she was willing to go to stand up for herself and for all of us. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Claire pacing back and forth in the kitchen. She was on her phone, scrolling through documents and muttering under her breath. "This is unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "They can't just tow someone's vehicle because they didn't pay a fee. It's not even legal." I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, still groggy from the night before. "What are you looking at?" I asked, nodding toward her phone. "HOA rules," she replied, tapping the screen emphatically. "And city ordinances. Turns out, Maple Street isn't technically part of any official town or municipality. It's private property governed by the HOA. That means local police can't do anything unless we file a formal complaint." A formal complaint, I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Against the HOA. Do you really think that'll work? Claire smirked, her eyes lighting up with determination. Oh, it'll work. But first, we need proof. And maybe a little backup. That's when she got the idea to call Officer Reynolds. Claire had volunteered with the K-9 unit a few years ago, helping train therapy dogs for community events. One of those dogs was Duke, a massive German shepherd who could sniff out contraband like nobody's business. His handler, Officer Reynolds, had always been supportive of Claire's advocacy work, often bringing Duke along to schools and fundraisers where Claire spoke about disability rights. She dialed his number without hesitation, putting the call on speaker so I could hear. Officer Reynolds. Hi, it's Claire Carter. Remember me from last year's fundraiser? There was a pause on the other end, followed by a warm chuckle. Claire, of course I remember you. How's Duke treating you these days? Claire laughed softly but quickly shifted gears. Actually, I need your help with something. Have you ever dealt with a situation involving an HOA towing a disabled person's vehicle? Another pause, this one longer. And HOA did what now? She explained everything. The van being towed, the $300 fee, and how Patricia Langley seemed to have made it her personal mission to make our lives miserable. By the time she finished, Officer Reynolds sounded both shocked and angry. That's harassment, he said firmly. Plain and simple. You should file a formal complaint against them for discriminatory practices. The ADA protects you, Claire. The ADA? I whispered, leaning closer. The Americans with Disabilities Act. Claire explained quietly before turning back to the phone. But I'm thinking bigger than just filing a complaint, Officer Reynolds. What if we showed them exactly what they're messing with? What do you mean? He asked cautiously. Claire grinned, her voice dripping with mischief. Let's give them a lesson they won't forget. Bring Duke over tomorrow morning. We'll park my van right back on the street where it belongs and see how long it takes Patricia to show up. Officer Reynolds hesitated, clearly torn between professionalism and curiosity. You're playing with fire, Claire, he warned. I know, she replied, her tone unwavering. But sometimes you have to burn down the forest to clear the path. He sighed, then chuckled reluctantly. All right, but don't make me regret this. By the time we hung up, Claire was practically buzzing with energy. For the rest of the day, she planned every detail, from retrieving the van to making sure Max stayed indoors during the showdown. She even drafted a speech to deliver if Patricia dared to confront her again. Watching her, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and anxiety. Pride because Claire was fearless, standing up for herself despite everything stacked against her. Anxiety because I knew Patricia wouldn't back down without a fight. As evening fell, we sat together on the porch, staring at the empty spot where Claire's van should have been. Do you think this is going to work? I asked finally. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand. Whether it works or not, we're sending a message. No one gets to treat us like second-class citizens. Not Patricia, not the HOA, not anyone. Her words stayed with me long after the sun set, casting shadows across the quiet street. Tomorrow would be a new day. And whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. Claire wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, the air felt electric, like the calm before a storm. Claire was up before sunrise, dressed in her favorite navy blue sweater and jeans, her posture straight and determined. She had her wheelchair parked near the door, ready just in case her legs gave out later in the day. I could tell she was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a cup of coffee, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. This wasn't just about getting her van back anymore. It was about proving a point. By the time Officer Reynolds arrived with Duke, a small crowd had already gathered outside our house. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like ours, and somehow, everyone seemed to know what was happening. Some of the neighbors stood on their porches or leaned against their fences, whispering among themselves. Others lingered closer, curiosity pulling them toward the scene unfolding in front of our driveway. Duke bounded out of the patrol car, his tail wagging furiously as he caught sight of Claire. She knelt down carefully, scratching behind his ears and murmuring softly to him. "Hey, boy," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We've got some work to do today." Officer Reynolds approached us, looking both amused and concerned. He was a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, but his expression softened when he saw Claire. "You sure about this?" he asked, glancing at the growing audience. "As sure as I'll ever be," she replied, standing up slowly. "Let's get my van back first." We drove to the impound lot together, Claire riding shotgun in Officer Reynolds' cruiser, while I followed behind in my truck. The lot was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. It looked more like a prison than a parking area, which only fueled Claire's determination. When we pulled up, she didn't wait for anyone to help her out of the car. She grabbed her cane from the back seat and hobbled toward the office, her jaw set with quiet resolve. Inside, the clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked surprised to see us. "Can I help you?" she asked, glancing nervously at Officer Reynolds' uniform. "We're here for the van," Claire said, sliding the paperwork across the counter. "It was towed yesterday." The clerk hesitated, flipping through files and typing something into her computer. "There's a fee to release it," she said finally. $300. Claire smiled sweetly, though there was steel beneath it. "Actually, there isn't. According to city ordinances, towing a vehicle due to non-payment of an HOA fee is illegal unless specific legal action has been taken. And since no such action was filed, this van is being released immediately." The clerk blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. That's when Officer Reynolds stepped in, his voice calm but authoritative. "She's right," he said. "If you have any questions, feel free to contact your supervisor. But until then, the van stays with its owner." After a few tense moments, the clerk nodded reluctantly and handed over the keys. Claire thanked her politely, though I noticed the edge in her tone hadn't softened. As we walked back to the van, she muttered under her breath, "They think they can bully people into submission. Well, not today." When we returned to Maple Street, the crowd had grown. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other were now chatting quietly, their faces a mix of confusion and intrigue. Claire parked the van right where it had been before, positioning it perfectly within the bounds of the driveway. Then she rolled her wheelchair out onto the sidewalk, Duke sitting proudly beside her like a loyal guardian. Patricia Langley arrived shortly after, flanked by two men in suits who looked like they belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a suburban cul-de-sac. Her face flushed red when she spotted Officer Reynolds standing there, arms crossed and badge gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time since we'd met her, Patricia seemed rattled. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, pointing at the van. "That vehicle is unauthorized." "Actually," Officer Reynolds interjected smoothly, "it's parked legally according to city code. And even if it weren't, Ms. Carter is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Any attempt to remove her vehicle without due process constitutes discrimination." Patricia sputtered, her usual composure crumbling under the weight of his words. But Claire wasn't done yet. She leaned forward slightly in her wheelchair, her voice steady and clear. "And just so we're clear," she added, her lips curling into a faint smile, "if anyone lays a hand on my van, or me, I'll press charges. Oh, and did I mention Duke here specializes in scent detection? He's very good at finding evidence." The crowd erupted into murmurs, some laughing nervously, others nodding in approval. Patricia's entourage exchanged uneasy glances before retreating silently to their cars. As they drove away, the tension in the air lifted, replaced by a sense of cautious triumph. For the first time in days, Claire relaxed. She patted Duke's head affectionately and turned to me, her eyes shining with pride. "Told you," she said simply. "No one pushes us around." The days following the showdown on Maple Street felt like a whirlwind. Word of what happened spread faster than any of us could have imagined. Neighbors who hadn't attended the first meeting started showing up at our door, eager to join the cause. Some brought baked goods as a gesture of gratitude. Others simply wanted to share their frustrations about the HOA. It was overwhelming, but also invigorating. For years, people had kept their heads down, too afraid to challenge Patricia and her iron grip on the neighborhood. But now, with Claire leading the charge, they finally found the courage to speak up. One evening, as we prepared for another strategy session in our living room, Officer Reynolds stopped by unannounced. He carried a thick folder under his arm and looked unusually serious. "You're making waves," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I've been hearing rumblings, not just from residents, but from higher-ups in the county office. People are paying attention." "What kind of attention?" Claire asked, her brow furrowing. "Good attention, mostly," he replied, "but also risky attention. The HOA board is scrambling. They called an emergency meeting last night, and apparently, Patricia tried to rally support by accusing you." He nodded toward Claire, "Off trying to destroy the community. She's desperate, which makes her dangerous." Claire leaned back in her wheelchair, crossing her arms. "Let her accuse me all she wants. We're not backing down." Officer Reynolds sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "That's what I figured you'd say. Which is why I brought this." He slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of documents detailing every complaint filed against the HOA over the past 5 years, everything from excessive fines to discriminatory practices. There were even emails between Patricia and other board members discussing ways to intimidate residents into compliance. "This is gold," Claire whispered, flipping through the pages. "Where did you get this?" "I have my sources," he said cryptically, though there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Use it wisely. If you bring these issues to light, especially the ones involving ADA violations, you'll have a strong case for reform, or even dissolving the HOA altogether." By the end of the week, the petition Sarah and Tom had been working on gained hundreds of signatures. Flyers plastered across the neighborhood urged residents to attend the next HOA meeting, promising an open forum where everyone's voice would be heard. The response was staggering. On the day of the meeting, the clubhouse overflowed with people, some sitting in chairs, others standing along the walls or spilling out onto the patio. Even Max made an appearance, lying near Claire's feet as if offering moral support. When Patricia walked in, flanked by her usual entourage, the room fell silent. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on Claire for a moment before she took her seat at the head of the table. She began the meeting with a stiff smile, attempting to maintain control. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her tone clipped. "We're here to discuss concerns about recent events and ensure that Ridgewood Heights remains a harmonious place for everyone." Before she could continue, Claire raised her hand. "If you don't mind, Patricia," she said calmly, "I'd like to address the group first." Patricia hesitated, clearly irritated but unable to refuse without looking petty. "Very well," she muttered. Claire wheeled herself to the front of the room, her presence commanding despite her small frame. "For years, many of us have lived in fear of this organization," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Fear of fines, fear of retaliation, fear of speaking out when something isn't right, but no more. We've collected evidence of unfair practices, discriminatory actions, and outright bullying. And we're done staying quiet." She held up the folder Officer Reynolds had given her, letting the weight of its contents sink in. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she listed specific examples. Families fined for hosting birthday parties, seniors penalized for needing handicap-accessible ramps, and countless instances of favoritism among certain households. Each revelation seemed to chip away at Patricia's carefully constructed facade. When Claire finished, the room erupted into applause. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their own stories, their voices trembling with emotion, but growing stronger with each word. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that the tide had turned. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, pale and speechless, as the crowd dispersed. As we left the clubhouse, Sarah hugged Claire tightly. "You did it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave us our neighborhood back." But Claire shook her head, smiling softly. "Not yet," she replied. "This is just step one. The real work starts now." In the weeks that followed the explosive HOA meeting, Ridgewood Heights buzzed with a sense of cautious optimism. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, almost as if years of tension had been lifted overnight. People who once avoided eye contact now exchanged warm greetings. Kids played freely in the streets again, and front yards began to show signs of personality. Colorful flowers, quirky lawn ornaments, even a few basketball hoops that hadn't dared appear before. But behind the scenes, the fight was far from over. Claire threw herself into organizing the next phase of the movement. With Sarah's help, she drafted a formal proposal for HOA reform, outlining clear changes they wanted to see: caps on fines, transparent decision-making processes, and protections for residents with disabilities. They also included a clause requiring regular resident feedback sessions to ensure the board stayed accountable. Meanwhile, Tom worked tirelessly on designing flyers and social media posts to keep momentum going. "We can't let them slip back into old habits," he said one evening during another strategy session in our living room. "If we stop pushing now, they'll just wait until things calm down and then go back to their usual nonsense." Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's why we need someone new at the helm. Someone who actually cares about this community." It was Officer Reynolds who first suggested she run for president of the HOA. At first, Claire laughed it off. "Me? President? I don't even like sitting through meetings," she joked. But the idea stuck. As word spread, neighbors began encouraging her too. "You're the reason we're standing up to them," Mr. Alvarez said earnestly. "If anyone can turn this place around, it's you." After days of deliberation, and plenty of nudging from me, Claire finally agreed. "Fine," she said with a sigh, though there was a twinkle in her eye. "But only because I know exactly how bad things can get if we leave it to someone else." The election process turned out to be more complicated than any of us expected. Patricia and her allies didn't go down without a fight. Flyers appeared overnight accusing Claire of trying to dismantle the HOA entirely, a blatant exaggeration designed to scare people into voting against her. Rumors circulated about how she supposedly planned to raise fees or impose stricter rules. It was frustrating, but Claire refused to stoop to their level. Instead, she focused on connecting with residents directly. She hosted small group discussions in driveways and backyards, listening to concerns and explaining her vision for a fairer, more inclusive neighborhood. Officer Reynolds brought Duke along to these events, drawing crowds and breaking the ice. Watching Claire interact with people, her genuine warmth and unwavering determination, made me realize just how much she'd grown since this whole ordeal began. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of us. On Election Day, the clubhouse was packed once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was electric with hope rather than hostility. When the results were announced, Claire won by a landslide. Patricia didn't stick around to congratulate her. Instead, she slipped out quietly, her face unreadable. That night, as we sat together on the porch, Claire looked exhausted but triumphant. "Well," she said softly, leaning her head against my shoulder, "we did it." "Yeah," I replied, wrapping an arm around her. "But what happens next?" She smiled faintly, gazing out at the quiet street bathed in moonlight. "Next, we rebuild." Months after the election, Ridgewood Heights began to transform in ways no one could have predicted. Claire wasted no time putting her vision into action. The first thing she did as HOA president was host a town hall meeting, not in the stuffy clubhouse, but right in the middle of the cul-de-sac on Maple Street. Chairs were set up in a circle, and everyone was invited to speak freely without fear of judgment or retaliation. For the first time, people felt heard. "I want this neighborhood to feel like home for all of us," Claire said at the start of the meeting. "Not just for those with perfect lawns or matching mailboxes, but for families, seniors, kids, pets, everyone who calls this place their own." Her words struck a chord. Neighbors opened up about what they loved and hated about living here. Some talked about how the old rules stifled creativity, while others shared stories of feeling alienated by the previous board. By the end of the night, a new motto emerged: Ridgewood Heights, where community comes first. Under Claire's leadership, the HOA underwent dramatic changes. Fines were reduced significantly, and guidelines became suggestions rather than mandates. Want to paint your front door bright red? Go ahead, it adds character. Need a wheelchair ramp installed? Done, no questions asked. Even Patricia's infamous approved vendor list was scrapped, giving residents the freedom to choose their contractors. But perhaps the biggest change was the introduction of community events. Every month, there was something new to look forward to: block parties, movie nights under the stars, even a Halloween parade where Max proudly wore a superhero cape. Officer Reynolds and Duke became regular fixtures at these gatherings, drawing smiles from kids and adults alike. Slowly but surely, Ridgewood Heights started to feel less like a gated fortress and more like a true neighborhood. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me with a satisfied smile. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad they towed my van." "Why's that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because it gave us a chance to fight back, to show them, and ourselves, that we're stronger when we stand together." As if on cue, Sarah appeared at the bottom of our driveway, her 2 young children trailing behind her. "Hey, Claire," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "Don't forget the bake sale tomorrow." Claire chuckled, shaking her head. "How could I forget? You've been reminding me every day this week." Sarah laughed, joining us on the porch. "Well, someone has to keep you organized. Besides, it's going to be amazing. Everyone's bringing something, and all the proceeds are going toward fixing up the playground." It was moments like these that made everything worth it. The bake sale turned out to be a huge success, with neighbors lining up to buy cookies, pies, and homemade bread. Kids ran around laughing, while adults chatted casually, swapping stories and recipes. It was hard to believe this was the same community that had once been divided by fear and resentment. Later that night, as I helped Claire clean up the kitchen, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd come. "Do you ever miss the quiet life?" I teased, nodding toward the stack of papers on the counter, a mix of event flyers, budget proposals, and thank you notes from grateful neighbors. She laughed, setting down her mug of tea. "Quiet is overrated. Besides, look at what we've built here. A real community. Not just houses, but people looking out for each other." And she was right. Ridgewood Heights wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it was ours. Together, we'd taken something broken and turned it into something beautiful. As I wrapped my arms around Claire, watching the lights flicker on in windows across the street, I knew one thing for certain: this was exactly where we belonged.